Welcome to another Fireside Chat with Andrew Maloney, COO, Query.AI. Query.AI is a decentralized access and analysis technology that unlocks the power of data. He is responsible for the company's go-to-market and business operations. Maloney is a 20-year veteran of the security industry with experience in sales, product, and customer success. He's recently served as a founding executive member and SVP of Field Operations at JASK, a modern cloud-native SIEM company acquired by SumoLogic. Maloney's experience also include other high-level field-facing positions in companies like Niara, acquired by HPE, Hewlett Packard, ESP, and ArcSight, acquired by HP. Prior to joining the vendor ArcSight, Maloney was a security practitioner building security operations for Missile Defense Agency and FBI ESOC after serving in the U.S. Air Force. I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I did. So why don't we do that? Why don't we get started, Andrew? So, Andrew, welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup / Cyber Guild. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. Unfortunately, we can't do this in person like I would love to, and hopefully we will one day once it's, everything kind of boils over. But we can cover, in 45 minutes to an hour, we can cover, just your your background, what are you doing today? I would really like to bring in, kind of behind the scenes of who is Andrew, like what was your, your journey so far, personal and is obviously professional in cybersecurity space. So why don't we kind of just kick it off while we, when people trickle in. And if you don't mind, just maybe start with how were you in kindergarten, right? So what was, did you fight over the toys in the sandbox, or were you a sharing kind of guy?
Oh, I don't think that was on the questions list. So let me start with just saying, first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invite. I've been following this for a while and very impressed with what you've been doing. So thanks for having me. Remembering kindergarten, you're dating me and challenging my memory here.
You don't have to answer. I sometimes ask about
superheroes. I may be able to get something. No, but I could give you. My son's big on Spider-Man now, so that helps me relate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because the reason why I asked that, and I kind of half jokingly, is because it's funny. Some people, the way they fall into security is really just picking a fork in the road. They had an opportunity and they were doing something else. And I noticed you were in the Air Force, right? You were basically you're a veteran, and so maybe you can walk us through that journey. And you were at different companies, you were at HP and so on. Maybe how you started, what kind of brought you into the tech career, and kind of walk us through that progression. And the reason again is, there's a lot of interest today of people that are in cybersecurity or not exactly where they want it to be. And you're an entrepreneur. Obviously, you've been, in the startup space for a while now. And so I have greatest appreciation to an entrepreneur like yourself, but it's not easy. So maybe we can kind of just kind of venture into how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate it. So, the fork in the road is interesting construct. I knew coming out of high school that I wanted to join the military. I come from a very blue collar family, so it was always kind of trades, and I was actually a mechanic coming out of high school, but I didn't want to do that, my whole life. I really liked the concept of special forces, but trying to look forward and with guidance from my family, what does the future of those careers look like, and where can you go make a comfortable living in a kind of an up and coming space? So that is actually the avenue that took me into tech. I did the ASVAB test with the Air Force, started talking around to them and even the Navy at the time, and decided to join. I don't even think the career field exists in the same construct, but it used to be called 3CO, which was computer operations. And, right out of high school, enlisted and went in and got some really good training. That path at the time was pretty typical, maybe not the military, but started at the help desk, moved through administration and into kind of more network operations. What was the interesting point was in a deployment overseas in around 2003, I was put in charge of the base security, so monitoring the firewall, looking at the proxy servers. Web traffic of certain types was illegal in that country we were in, so I was reporting on those things weekly. And it was that experience coming back when one of the tech sergeants came up and asked me if I'd like to join the security group. So that was the kind of luck of the draw, if you will, that got me into security. And then from there, this is early 2000s still, so mostly perimeter security, maybe some IDS systems out there, but only on the perimeter. And that really started it all, right? What I like about security is it's this kind of ecosystem construct of bringing all these things together. So the more you learn about, even help desk stuff, which seems kind of menial. Nobody wants to do it. It's not an exciting job, right? We're responding to tickets. Gives you a lot of the foundation you need to do troubleshooting later on, right? And understanding networking, admin, all of these things come together in security. So it was a great foundation for me. So that when I separated from the military, with even not a college degree or any of those things, right? Just 4 years of Air Force experience, had enough credibility to go and get a good job with some government contracting and help to build out enterprise security operations centers, which then introduced me to ArcSight. And a couple of years later, after that and some certifications, the vendor life called, and I decided to make that jump. So one thing leads to another.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you find being a veteran help you in some ways, just in terms of discipline and maybe, curiosity and just the kind of the aptitude to do whatever you can? Would that be a correct statement?
I think there's a certain personal characteristic around people, right? And you find this commonly in veterans because they volunteer to serve their country, and there's aspects of discipline that are kind of instilled upon you, right? And this has nothing to do with just the U.S. military, but militaries across the world. And I think the interesting part of that is I always look to hire vets where we can, because there's a certain characteristic that you can almost expect. But that's not to say that it's only found within veterans. And the right resources are going to be the ones who have that self-motivation, who want to show up to work and do the job and aren't afraid to learn new things. And, frankly, are comfortable outside of their comfort zone. If you're only doing the same thing every day, you're never going to grow your career. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. It's challenging. It's scary to go outside of those boundaries. But, some of those old cliche sayings, right? Outside of your comfort zone is where the magic happens.
Right. So what, memory from these past roles, and what do you think that really propelled you? Like, you're a senior guy and in a startup, you're successful, by all means. If you look at what you've done so far, what, and typically what I find with folks, it's, they didn't do it alone. It's a combination of, luck and circumstance and some help from folks, but also being in the right place at the right time. What do you think propelled you to get, like, the first ArcSight? I mean, ArcSight is a successful company. What, maybe like what point in time in your career you can pinpoint and say, yeah, that was the absolutely right decision, the right time, right place?
So I think for me, that was more of the pivot from the heavy technical roles into more of the business functions. And I think you nailed it again, right? With the kind of a little bit of luck, a little bit of opportunity, and a little bit of the right person at the right time. I got a new manager when I started to focus on the federal business of ArcSight in early 2009, 10 timeframe, who saw something in me that no one else prior had, and was willing to take a chance and give me more responsibility and say, hey, let's go do this thing together, right? Because one of the things you need as a base function is this kind of ambition and drive and willingness to hear no 1,000 times. That's even more important when you get into the entrepreneurial space and you're trying to build early stage companies, right? You're going to need a whole lot more no's than yeses, but you just got to be willing to go beat your head against that wall as many times as it takes until you find a crack. And this individual is still a great mentor of mine today. But he gave me the opportunity. He started to kind of coach and took me under his wing and then show me the business side of how companies work, frankly, right? And in that day, we were selling services. So 1 hour of services was the product for us to support everything else. And then from there, it just kind of took off, right? You get that opportunity and you capitalize on it.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is I find that even just today's environment, I think it's, at least from what I've seen, it's slightly lacking. The most companies are hiring people from similar types of positions. They do not necessarily have the time or capacity to train on the job, and which is again, I think for people trying to get into the space, it's very tough. They to get it, like the first opportunity is really difficult. What would you recommend for somebody who's in that situation and is looking for that mentor, is looking for that opportunity to to get exposed to some of the cybersecurity disciplines? What would you say to that?
I think network is everything, right? You hear this time and time again. It obviously has gotten even more relevant as technologies have evolved, and we are all connected now on social. But just reaching out, don't be afraid to ask for a favor, to make an introduction. Last week, I got a cold outreach from an Army veteran, somebody I had never heard of. Like, hey, you're a fellow veteran, always trying to build this network. I'm in information security. Just wanted to connect, right? No ask, not trying to sell me anything. Just let's make the connection, and we've done that now, right? And there was a couple messages exchanged, and I feel if there's an opportunity for me to help this individual, I would absolutely do that, right? So I think the first step is just reaching out. He didn't know me from anyone, and there's a lot of folks out there that I've done cold outreach to and had very warm reception, right? And again, 99% of those are going to go unanswered, but you can't be afraid to reach out. And then I think in any career, you've got to be passionate about what you're going to do. But if cybersecurity is for you, we want more and more people in the industry. I think it's on us as the vendors, right, putting that hat on, and as other security practitioners to make it easier for folks to get in. You should be out there looking for people that you can mentor. How can you help others? This next generation is going to drive this forward. And when I read these article after article about the staffing shortages and challenges, it's like, we've got massive unemployment through the country, yet we've got these phenomenal paying jobs in this really exciting career field, and they're unstaffed. Like, why is that? There's obviously something broken there. So I think it takes a village to make those things work. But if you've got the right drive and dedication, you're willing to put in the work, you can do the outreach. There's a lot of certifications and studying. Again, back to the security ecosystem, start small, right? Take a Network Plus, an A+ certification class just to get the basics down, and you can build upon that. There's a ton of material out there.
And I believe that inherently people want to help as well. I think it's just a matter of asking. Some people are afraid to go out and expose themselves and, get out of the comfort zone and ask people for help.
I would agree entirely. Yeah.
I mean, it's just even reaching out to somebody cold, that's not easy. And especially now as entrepreneurs, you're obviously very familiar with that. You have to reach out to people every day. So fast forward to, so you've been to ArcSight, and then you've been to a couple companies, one which got acquired. So what do you do today? What's your day-to-day look like today?
So I'm at a company now for about the last, 7-8 months already, called Query.AI. I joined there working with the founder who had just built the MVP and building out the go-to-market. So the first part was to take the MVP to the market, do a lot of cold outreach.
Just for the sake of not everybody knows what MVP is.
Thank you for catching that. Yep.
We're entrepreneurs, we get that, but just
fair enough. Minimum viable product. So something we were going to take to market that we thought had enough legs to it to solve a problem for the customer. And then my first role in that was to figure out how we were going to talk about it, right? What problems it was going to align to, what the business plan was going to look like for us to go in and build on top of this, because it takes both a technology and a go-to-market strategy of business opportunity for you to build a company, right? So that's two things that often get decoupled. Like, oh, I got the best tech in the world. Well, you can have the best tech and still not have a strong business, and vice versa, right? So that's my role within Query. We launched the company in March of this year, and are now working to kind of expand the awareness and solve problems for our customers without making it too much of a sales pitch.
No, absolutely, and there's no shame. I always say, hey, this is America, right? There's no shame about pitching everybody. I mean, that's what we're thankfully we're a capitalist society, right? So for MVP, what's interesting about MVP specifically, and you can probably back me up on that in cybersecurity, if you're not ashamed to show your product, it means that you've gone too far in development, right?
That's a good point. Yes.
So how did you? And it's very tricky, right? So how do you get that feedback loop to make sure that you have something that people want, and obviously not just want to say, oh, this is great, but also willing to pay for it. Have you looked into what's out there? I mean, you're obviously not alone in this space. Are you looking to see what other companies are doing, or is it strictly just, hey, I'm going to do the best I can? I'm like people don't know they need an iPhone, right? Or they didn't know they need an iPhone, and then they created an iPhone, and everybody adopted it.
Yeah, I don't know that there is one right answer to that. Some people approach this solely from, let me work with customers to define the problem, and then from the beginning, they're helping to design the MVP. Some folks have market experience that say, hey, to your point, right, you're going to need an iPhone even if you don't know it yet, and not be afraid to kind of build it. There's risk to both sides of those as well. In our case, these companies, ArcSight, for example, right? Even my security experience in the Air Force and these different government contracts was largely around security operations, around security monitoring, and looking at how do you bring all this data together to support your investigations and kind of defend and then respond to these different attacks and breaches and incidents and all the false positives, frankly, as well. So in those technologies, it was always a construct of centralization, and none of that has really solved the problem we set out to do even 20 years ago, right? So as you look at that market, and you've got a lot of that in-person experience in the field, you can get some pretty good perception of what the challenges that need solved are. And then from there, it's all about testing a hunch, right? There's multiple phases of an MVP, the first of which is building that minimum viable functionality. And to your point, it's never going to be perfect, right? But even 10x GA software is not perfect. There's always bugs somewhere. taken that to market, and then what I call market validation of that MVP, right? Does it solve the problem we set out to solve? Maybe more importantly, do the customers want to solve the problem you thought you wanted to solve, right? Or they
Right,
have an
right.
entirely different use case you haven't even thought of yet? And I think, that's part of the fun of this process, is the exploration of that and really kind of fine tuning, what the value is. And in the essence of capitalism and the Query.AI ask you had, right? We started as this kind of NLP tool to make it easier for some of these junior practitioners coming into the industry to ask simple questions of their data. And it was, let's use natural language processing, NLP, right? That's not a known acronym maybe either, so I'll try to do better about that. But show me X, right? Login failures, show me my last alerts in 24 hours, whatever the case may be, and have it go get that data. And as we took that to market, we found that there was a lot of interest in that. It's like, oh, that seems super interesting. That's super cool. But nobody needed it. Nobody wanted to buy it because it didn't solve a problem that they must have today. And that's actually what led us to our kind of current message and positioning and feature function of the product, which is really kind of connecting these decentralized systems. Everybody tries to put stuff in one bucket to analyze it, but what they end up with instead of a data lake is it's often referred to as many data ponds, and they still need access to that data. So now we reach out, we use natural language processing as this universal query language, if you will, but it touches all these different data stores and brings that information back to one place. And that is something that we have found as a kind of a burning need for security operations. So, maybe a little shameless there, but there's
no,
certainly
that's
reality to that and how we brought the MVP to market.
it's perfect. Now, you weren't scared about the fact that a problem that exists for so many years. Sometimes, they're talking about passwords going away, right? So they've been talking. How long have been talking about that? It's a data lake, versus data ponds. Whatever. That's the problem that's been around for a long time, and it's a big problem, right? It's not something that is easily be solved. So, were you like thinking, okay, maybe that's too large of a problem to tackle, or was it, like, how did you approach something like that?
More of the lessons learned in kind of entrepreneurship and working at early stage companies, right? One of the easiest, I think, mistakes to make is to try and do everything, try to conquer the world, because a lot of these things are boil the ocean type problem sets to really solve them. So I think, in our case, our grand vision is very large and very exciting for us. But you got to start chewing away on things that are kind of more bite-sized. I had another friend and kind of mentor of mine. He said, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and don't start from the back end." Right? So,
That's great.
it's just words to live by, because that's kind of the way you have to approach these problem sets. So, we have focused very tightly on security, really around supporting kind of the ad hoc investigation, response, and threat hunting use case. So while the overall problem is large, if you've got one focus area that you're just going to go and be extremely good at, right, that'll build the foundation, and then you can start to bite off additional chunks after that.
And what attracted you specifically? I mean, somebody like yourself with your credentials and the the experience you have, you could have gotten a job, working for big consulting firm or a big vendor, a very large vendor, and so on. But you decided, and you have a family too. You decided to go out there and do the grind, right? So you're working for a small company, and you guys are basically every day reinventing yourself. So what attracted you to that specifically?
I like, and this is a kind of default cliche answer as well, I like to build things, right? But it's again one of those things. I'm never going to stop pushing myself. You're being very kind and in building up my ego. There's always more to do, right? I haven't accomplished all the goals I've set out to do. I really want to build a company from the ground up. And if you look at my past, every company I go to seems to be earlier and earlier, smaller and smaller. But I think, with that, there's always lessons to be taken. And some things succeed, some things fail, right? Certainly more fail than not, but there's at least as much to be learned from failure as there is from success. And, for me, I've spent time at big companies. ArcSight was acquired by HP. I was there for 4 years, and just watching how slow some of those things move at the various levels of bureaucracy. Like this pivot I talked about, we did in a matter of months, and now the whole company is behind this and we're going after it. There's new features in the product. Those things don't happen in big business. So there's a lot of excitement that comes with it. And, with the stress and the struggles come great rewards, right? Just being able to recruit folks to a company that's this risky, this early on, about the excitement and because they want to work with me again, are some of the biggest success factors that you can measure, I think, as a human, right? If somebody likes and believes in you enough to come work alongside you and be part of that team, that says a tremendous amount. And I think that's, part of the way that I measure my success personally, is am I just a good person day to day, right? There's all kinds of ways to say, okay, I got X money in my bank account, X amount of friends on Facebook for lack of better comparison points. But realistically, like, okay, are you the kind of person that can look yourself in the mirror, feel good about it? And what would others say about you when you're not there?
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting as well is that people think it's the graph is just going up, and I've seen a couple of these memes, and where graphs for entrepreneurs, like there's like these ups and downs, and it's really like a roller coaster, really.
Every
How do
day's a
you
roller coaster.
Yeah, so how do you and some days you wake up, you feel great about yourself and what you're doing, some days not so much, right? So how do
You're
you
bringing all this reality to front and center, David.
I apologize.
No,
But
it's good.
yeah, but how do you deal with that? How do you motivate yourself to keep going? And then and specifically, the cyberspace is not easy. I mean, I think that if you look at difficulty, and I mean, nothing's easy. Creating a company is not easy, but I think the cyberspace specifically, it's about cloud. It's about people unproven technology is even tougher to go to market with. There's a lot of moving parts. So how do you keep motivating yourself, like when you come across these hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's just sheer stubbornness, right? At the end of the day, we talked about this earlier on. I think it's just those kind of embedded character traits of not being afraid to hear the word no, right? Being able to get back up and try. I mean, that's really the keys to success across any company, anyone. That's fundamental. And you'll see that in any business book you read or any study, right? No one hears yes 100% of the time. And if they do, they're really not prepared for failure should it come up. So, I think you got to know what you're getting into, go in eyes wide open. You got to believe in the bigger picture. And that's where I say, finding the passion and the drive, right? Does this excite you? Are you happy to get out of bed, even on the bad days, and go to work? Because, it's all relative too, right? What is a bad day? You hear no in a conversation, you're upset that second, but it only takes one other customer like, you guys are really onto something, this is phenomenal, to get you just that much more motivated about it. And I think, at that point, you may start to look back and say, well, maybe they just don't get it, right? And, the success criteria there is you've built your company, you've gone to the next 2 or 3 levels, you're past that really early adopter phase and then the front side of that curve, and you're getting more of the mass market appeal, right? You're not the unknown company anymore. And maybe that same person who didn't initially get it is now a customer of yours, right? And that, I think that says a lot too. If everybody took no for an answer the first time, none of this innovation would exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the biggest companies now that are in the on the stock exchange, I mean, they've started with, people like yourself, so who knows, maybe you might be ringing the bell in, a couple of years, but it does take,
fingers crossed, a lot of work between now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. But it takes, again, like circumstance, a lot of hard work. There's a lot of elements for success. And then also timing, we talked about in the kind of the prior conversation, is timing, circumstances, there's a lot to it as well. So if you could have done something different, in the past, several years, when you start your career, what would that be? If you're like, now you have a crystal ball going backwards.
Yeah, I think maybe just kind of more general as I reflect on this, and what I will try and instill to my kids as they grow up. There's a lot of ways to make money in this world, right? So when I grew up in my very kind of, again, blue collar roots, it was the trades and then the white collar jobs. So you were a CEO, a doctor, a lawyer, yada yada yada, and those were the ways that you see to make money. And that's just not true, right? You can be an entrepreneur anywhere, and you see people doing it all the time. So that wasn't immediately apparent to me. Some people are, lucky enough to have the foresight that, from the get-go, that's a possibility. For me, I don't know that it would have changed too much. I really like technology, and it's appalling to me to look back. I mean, most people won't relate to this either, because the optical drives of yesterday with CD-ROMs and CD burners aren't what they used to be. Everything's USB, and it's all, even now more so, the digital MP3s in the cloud, right? So we don't have these kind of media as we used to. But when I went into the Air Force, I had put a CD burner in my parents' computer, and I did not know how to make it work. And what I found out coming out of the Air Force was there was a master and a slave switch on these things. And if you didn't have the jumpers right, you weren't going to make it work. So that's how little I knew about technology going in, but I knew that I was interested in it, and it was a drive. So all of that is relevant and kind of moving forward. What I would change during my career, I would have gotten into the business and sales side earlier. I left a lot of money on the table as a services guy, doing a lot of work and not necessarily getting the credit. So don't be afraid to take that leap. It's outside of a lot of people's comfort zone. To your point, the cold outreach, I still don't enjoy those things. I love the conversations once it happens, but cold calling people and sending out cold emails and hearing no a million times is really hard on anyone. But it's all part of it. Right?
Yeah, it's part of it, and it's business, right? That's how the economy is moving. People don't realize that every single company out there, and even most people that have their jobs today, despite the fact they might not know it, somebody's out there is selling something. That's why they have a job to begin with. So
Absolutely.
it's all driven by, we're knowledge-based economy, but also, services-based economy and so on. So that's interesting. So how do you teach your kids to be entrepreneurs or have that mindset?
They're very young right now, so I don't have that problem just yet. But I think, just to keeping an open mind, right? Letting them know that they can explore their passions. I mean, I've seen some good Venn diagrams too. It's like something you're good at, something that pays well, and something you're interested in. Because if you're interested in, you're not good at it, even if it pays well, you're not going to get the job, right? So it's like finding that perfect mix. And perfection is the wrong term there, because nothing's actually perfect. But if you're passionate about something, if you are good or can become good at it, and a lot of that just comes from how much work you're willing to put in, and you can find something that will pay the bills, then you're in a pretty good spot going forward. Give them those freedoms, but then also telling them again that this entrepreneurial lifestyle can exist, and they're going to be more fortunate, I think, in the fact that I can guide them down that path, and give them the ability to take that risk, right? There's a good parachute for them to fall back on, and not everybody has that. So that's an extremely fortunate position to be in, for sure.
And I think we live in amazing times. Joe Rogan just received $100 million and basically the most valuable person on the planet. And what he does like video blogs and online. He's just an early adopter of that, but it's really remarkable. As you mentioned, there's a lot of ways to make money. So let's kind of jump into a bit about cybersecurity. Like who in your opinion does security well today? And like just if you look at the macro environment.
Yeah, I think it's keeping company names out of it and maybe like individual people. I'll look at it more like sector approach, right? So I'll say first, what's interesting, we get asked a lot in our conversations with investors, advisors, whoever, even customers sometimes, right? What does a mature customer look like in your mind? And one of the things that you really cannot correlate in cybersecurity, and it still kind of astonishes me, is that you'll have a Fortune 50 account that is super mature, has huge budget, every tool under the umbrella, right? That's not surprising. But you can also find very, very mature mom and pop shops where there's 2 or 3 folks in there and they're just wicked smart and they care and they're hacking stuff together with open source technologies. Whereas you can also find Fortune 50 companies who have all these, this money, they've got big teams, and they're not very mature. So I think overall, the maturity curve of the industry is far lesser than it probably should be or could be. And there's not really a good correlation point to that. Where I find people leaning forward and being innovative in bigger pockets is usually like the financials and stuff, especially on the front end of like innovation, where early stage startups spend a lot of their time. And this is a little bit conflicting too, because there are still big banks that don't want to use any of the cloud technologies and keep everything on-prem, right? So that's kind of a legacy approach in certain ways. But at the same time, there's a lot that are leaning forward and trying new technologies. And I think those that are willing to look at security as an ecosystem, who have solid leadership that aren't looking at the next shiny thing, but really what is the security ecosystem, right? You've got to understand what you're putting in place functionally, going back to Sun Tzu's Art of War and know yourself, know your adversary, right? What is your business? What are you trying to protect? Who might want to attack you? What are their capabilities and intents to do so? And then putting the rest of those things in place, so you're not implementing insecure software with bad configurations that expose you to the world, getting more and more open, obviously, as we adopt cloud technologies, but then looking at ways to implement the right set of technology that works well together and cohesively, because we've got a lot of tools, we don't have a lot of cohesion. A lot of these things are kind of disjointed, some of them are duplicative, and I think every CISO we talk to is looking at ways to consolidate and make their teams more effective. So I don't know if that answers who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, but there's a lot of observations across the market that we see.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, and maybe like to add to that, as you mentioned, CISOs that you work with or deal with, what are the kind of the top priorities for them right now that you see that they need to solve? And I guess the COVID-19 is creating some some challenging challenges right now as well.
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? I mean, I think some of these things predate COVID, some not. A lot of companies are trying to be everything to everyone, and some of the bigger companies, right? And you see this from vulnerability vendors who are now doing SIM type things. They're getting into kind of entity and user analytics. That I've seen a lot of feedback from CISOs is not ideal for them, right? The concept of having one vendor who can do all these things for you is appreciated, but when you try to do everything, you're very seldom good at all of those things, right? So, I think figuring out again, who best to fill the gaps. When you look at the gaps that they're looking at today and the kind of things they care about the most, I think a lot of them, right, have that human element, right? So how do I take care of my people and make sure they're safe and healthy, their families? So people have gone dark intentionally and well deservingly, right? We have to make sure that our home lives are intact first. Back to the business side, looking across, right? What is the new risk for them as they've moved all these users remotely? And that could be anything from, hey, we still don't have enough supply chain to get everybody laptops and corporate assets, right? So they're taking a lot of risk opening this up to the bring your own device. To the same point, if they've got the capabilities, they've still got a lot of remote users. There's still a lot more exposure. There's less controls they can put around that different infrastructure that is now remote. Less consistency in check-ins and patching and all of those things, right, which are kind of core to a good security again posture. So I see a lot of focus there. I think there's still a lot of unknown too, right? So I guess the net concise answer to your question, email is big right now. There's been a ton of stuff around COVID that's malicious and suspicious, a lot of malware associated with those things as well. Remote users with VPN access and things, making sure they've got like a good handle on that, how they're using these kind of remote workforce applications, the Zooms, the Hangouts, so on and so forth. And I'm sure you've all seen the Zoom bombing and stuff that happened as COVID was first coming out. But there's still a lot of unknowns, right? We don't know what a full quarter under COVID is going to look like yet. These businesses haven't released their earnings statement, so I think some of them could be frankly fearing, like, am I going to have a budget for my team next year? Am I going to lose some of these things? Security is often insulated, but it's not bulletproof.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've seen is that security always needed to be justified, right? But I think now more so than been before. It's like every spend is now being scrutinized. And budgets are required to get cut. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But so to add on to that question, what have you seen change, like in the industry itself, like in the past 3-4 years? What's different, and where do you see it's going, and what do you think that the current the gaps are going to be like maybe 2-3 years from now? What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, there's been a lot of changes over the years. I think that the biggest is just like the adoption of cloud, right? If you look back 3 to 5 years, maybe cloud was a dirty word. I know in my last company, JASK, we were an early cloud SIEM vendor, and getting customers comfortable with sending the data to the cloud was a struggle, right? JASK was acquired by Sumo. Sumo's been doing that 10 years, very early to that market. And I think probably had a lot of those same challenges with, like, I'm just not comfortable sending my data outside of my environment and learning how to protect it and all of that. So I think, you've probably seen all of the different, I'll call them memes. Maybe that's not the right term. I'm not all caught up on every one of those kind of social intricacies, but the pictures of, like, who drove your IT transformation strategy, right? Was it CEO? Was it the CIO? Or was it COVID, right? So, that has rapidly evolved. I think a lot of people were trying to move that direction. They've just been forced to do it much faster. I think there's a lot of gaps inherently in that too, because with all of these new technologies come unknowns and new risk and new ways to kind of exfiltrate those, exploit new technologies. And that's always going to be the case. You see, it's hard to put a good example. If you look at some of the breaches throughout time, it's not even always the security infrastructure is being breached, right? Target is a very famous one that came in through the air conditioning contractor and some of those systems. In my house, I have wireless cameras. I've got, wireless smoke detectors, all of these things connected to the internet. Businesses are largely the same in many ways, right? So I think as we adopt the new technologies, the gaps are going to be, have we really looked at all of these things, the way that they interconnect, all of the potential areas for exploitation, and do we have the right technologies in place to solve for those problems and reduce risk as much as possible?
Right. So you do currently NLP, and I'm assuming you use machine learning. And do you really believe that we end up with some AI machine, AI centralized AI systems that will create actions depending on what they detect, and it's going to be all automated? I think the automation is a big key here. Do you think that we're getting there?
I think when you speak to kind of 3 to 5 years out, right, there is a heavy push towards this. Those technologies have been around for a while. So when you even look back 3 years, it's funny to look at the market space. Coming from the SIM background, it was first like security analytics, I guess, was the first kind of nomenclature for some of this, and then it turned to ML, and then ML wasn't sexy anymore. So then it's AI. And all of these things have different definitions, all kind of falling under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. But most people think AI, they think a cognitive system that thinks and can respond to you, and more like I guess maybe Jarvis from Iron Man.
Yep.
That's not a reality today, right? We're a long way from that. So if we can move towards those things, that would be fantastic. We use the term more often augmented intelligence. And I think there are a lot of ways to leverage these different technologies to solve small problems. In the construct of Query, I think there is a way for us to use these things with the kind of curated knowledge base, right? Every time we engage with a customer, we learn new questions that they want to ask of their data. We can help to translate those things into the natural language and allow people to now just say it or type to it, which means they don't have to learn 10 different complex query languages, right? There's a lot of value in that. But if you could start maybe auto-completing or have, this internal assistive AI guide them down an investigation, looking at, okay, here is a new analyst based on the questions they're asking. I can kind of profile that maybe, right? This doesn't exist today, but we're talking futures potential. Then I could profile this as a junior analyst, and I say, okay, here's the questions they're asking. I think these are other relevant questions they may ask, or here's what I think the intent they're looking for is, and start to really show them the path, and then connect these disparate systems again, right? It's not all about what the log file says or the context of that enrichment system, threat intelligence or otherwise. Sometimes it's just a matter of, okay, what is this thing I'm seeing, right? What do I know about this vulnerability, this malware family, the actor group associated with it? Those are the kind of things that are really going to make them better security people, because they're going to have the whole story then that they can start to kind of derive from. And I absolutely think we will make strides over the next 3 to 5 years to use this augmented intelligence to make humans better, amplify human potential, if you will. And then I think there's also going to be more and more things that we can automate end to end. There's just there's so much gray area in security. It's a hard use case right now. We used to use the analogy in a previous company of, I'm giving you a self-driving car, right? You're not going to take a self-driving car without a gas pedal, a steering wheel, and a brake pedal, right? You're just not going to trust it. It's going to take time to earn that before you're comfortable getting into something that you have no control over and trusting your life with it. And I think that's the path that we're on, right? It's going to take that time. It's going to take some training and some back and forth, and then we'll ultimately get there.
Right. I think so as well. I don't know how quickly, but I think things are accelerating in terms of technology, in terms of the pace of technology and so on. So maybe you can provide us, just tell us a personal win for you and a personal loss, if you don't mind sharing with the group. Everyone is going through all those, and it'd be great to kind of, recognize some of that, for you.
Okay. So I touched one of the wins earlier, and that was, going to a company and then, when people are willing to follow you. I think that is one of the bigger personal wins in my life, right? There's a lot of things that have gone well, and I've been very fortunate, whether it's the big deal you won or the next round of funding you've gotten, there's a lot of those things, right? Sometimes it's just getting the damn system to install the application you want with the 4,000 dependencies. So depending on where you're at in your career, those things can be very frustrating when you're kind of recompiling libraries to make shit work. And far separated from that now, thank God. But in that day, that was a huge win. So I think, there's a lot of small victories you can celebrate. I still think that people are the most relevant, right? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what we had. Technology comes and goes; it changes frequently. But if you've built a good core group of people and a nice, strong network, that will pay dividends over and over again. So that is one of the things I'm most proud of, right? Whether you call it a success or not, is the network of people that I've been able to surround myself with and build really strong relationships. And cyber is phenomenal for that, right? We got DEF CON events and all these different hacking conferences that happen, and you can build a really strong collaboration group. Your security meetup in New York is a great example of this as well. So I think that's a critically important piece. Failures are abundant as well. Everything from accidentally wiping databases again in the early career, being unable to deliver the level of value that you would desire to a customer in that engagement. That's even more relevant in services when they're paying ungodly hourly rates. Being told no a million times, right? Whether it's the customer, whether it's the VC, whether it's, hey, this idea doesn't hold water. Failure is ripe throughout. You've got to be willing to get up, wipe yourself off and go back after it. So I try not to dwell on those things. But if we spend enough time, we could go through thousands of them, I'm sure.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing. So in terms of, so let's talk about a bit about the current events. So you obviously were working from home to begin with, right? I mean, I'm assuming your company is mostly kind of remote workers for now. What's changed from your perspective, and how does a startup in early stage deals with the current pandemic, and how do you approach customers? Things have really changed again in the past even 6 months. So how do you specifically deal with that today?
So that's an interesting data point. We are all remote, right? And it's very common for startups. Maybe not all of them today, but we've obviously got our headquarters. It's actually in South Dakota, the Silicon Prairie. That'll catch on eventually, I promise.
Silicon Prairie.
So
Cool.
it's different than the kind of standard Silicon Valley or kind of coastal company, but construct's the same. We come from the backgrounds, and we've got a small pocket there. So those folks have now switched to working from home, but we have the capabilities. Everything we use is cloud technology, so it's all kind of disconnected. We do a lot of video conferencing anyway. So for us, the day-to-day was really not any different, frankly. I mean, Zoom is more congested and not quite as stable as it was before, but Slack and emails and all those things were very transparent. There wasn't really even a transition for us. My hardest thing now is trying to watch the kids and do the work because the nanny can't come to the house until next week. Thank God it's coming back. So anyway, there was a major pivot, right? That is capable today because of technology. When I left HP and went to my first early stage startup since ArcSight, you're talking about 8-year gap, right? That's a big change in time. HP was, Exchange and all these kind of heavy on-prem services. So you get a laptop from them that was pre-configured with all this stuff, and you needed, VPN access and all these things to access stuff. To the new company that I went to called Niara was early in the UBA space, and everything was cloud. They used Gmail, they had, Dropbox, I believe, and Google Drive. I think they were using HipChat, which is one of the Confluence Jira type tool sets for Slack or for chatting. There's a lot less dependency on those things. So we are fortunate to be in a time where that has become more of the norm for companies and engaging with them. Obviously there was a major shift, right? And everybody went dark that week of mid-March. They had to figure out what's right for them. Like, how do I keep my family safe? How do I lock down the home front? And then you started to see people like looking, okay, well, how do I get my employees where they need to be so I could still function and operate the business and reduce the risk and just do my job, frankly. And I think now we've certainly seen people start to poke their heads back up, some of which are kind of aching for human connection, are more willing to take conversations than they used to be.
Yeah,
some people are still hard to get a hold of, right? I mean, I think it just depends on what's going on in their plate, but you got to be patient, right? I've seen a lot of things that I really dislike in terms of, assuming false empathy. I'm not going to say there aren't people out there who are asking questions around you and your family who really just do not care, but that's not me, right? I think this human connection is an important piece. So if I send an email, I was like, I hope you and your family are well, I genuinely mean that. And for somebody like, oh, this jackass, he's a month behind that. I was like, this is not messaging to me. So those kind of things frustrate me a bit. I think, empathy is critical for us as a species, right? And we should always have that, whether it's good times, bad times, otherwise. We can celebrate victories together. We can mourn losses and kind of deal with that. This is a big change for everybody, right? And there's still, like I said, so many unknowns. Layoffs constantly happening, unemployment still being filed for and going up. Some sectors doing really well, some sectors really, really getting hit from this. So I think it does depend, right? For us, we're still really early in the go-to-market, so we're just trying to connect to folks and have conversations, not a kind of pressured sale thing. But what we have found, I think, more often than not in this case, is people are willing to talk now if they have the cycles to do so, and will at least hear you out, right? And I think that's a good business practice. I wrote a blog article a couple of weeks back, from the startup front lines. That's critical. Just getting a conversation started with people and letting them know that you're out there is imperative to getting your business off the ground. It doesn't mean I expect you to buy something, right? You're going to hear a lot more no's. And if it doesn't work for you, I don't want to waste my time and resources either. But it's always great to connect and hear more feedback and validate what others are seeing, what they're hearing. And to your point, right? What are your pains, Mr. CISO, Mr. CIO, Mr. Security Analyst? Everybody's in this together.
And I love what you mentioned about empathy. I think now more so than before, empathy is critical, just because we miss the human connection. Everything is done remote, and I think that's key. And that's why I try to bring in the story behind the people in cyber, because it's not about the technology. It's also about the people. So let's plug in Query.AI, and just briefly. So I would think that because you guys basically solve like a major problem and have the ability to, make, kind of the existing staff and existing system makes, more of it. That maybe potentially there's more reception, reception here is more positive because the people have to do more with less. So they're already making the investment in all those systems, but they have alert fatigue, right? And they need to log into disjointed systems and so on. So do you find that the conversation now are, slightly more open around that, or, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think everybody's got a lot of priorities on their plate, right? So it's always a challenge to get yourself pushed up high enough in the stack, and oftentimes it's not even a budgetary thing, but just like a human capital. Do I have the resources to test your software, even if I believe in what you're doing? We have yet to talk to an enterprise who doesn't suffer from this in some way, shape, or form. No one has all the data and context that their security teams need in one place. So we've had some really good conversations, and again, those help to overcome the challenging days, right, where you do get some of the no's, where people start to believe. And we've been engaged with large retailers, we've been engaged with financials, education. Security is one of those things that doesn't have a specific vertical, right? It really applies across the board. So this construct of decentralized access and being able to ask a simple question, get an answer on demand, wherever that data lives. There's cost savings concepts to it from, you've had an analyst position unstaffed for 6 to 12 months because you can't find the senior enough person. Maybe you put somebody more junior in there, and we can use the technology to, again, amplify the human potential as part of our storyline, and not so much of like the automate away the human. I don't think we're there yet to our earlier conversation. So I think that's a key piece. But, if you're not duplicating data and trying to send everything to one repo, which is extremely challenging, whether it's a technical thing from a scale like it used to be, right? We've overcome a lot of that, whether it's a cost thing, which is still a very real challenge for anybody that's dealing with kind of SIM tools and things that charge based on ingest, or even politics and bureaucracy. There's always some reason why you can't get all your data in one place and you're forced to use these systems. So making that easier and trying to do this in a way like, if I was to build a security tool, and we are in this case, right, what would I want? I would want something that's super lightweight, super easy to deploy, super easy to get value from, because in the security monitoring space, specifically around kind of SIM and other tools, they're very complex. It's a very heavy lift. It's a lot of manual effort, and they're complicated tools solving complicated problems. There's a reason for that, and they're getting better. But ultimately, to solve the problem, I think intuitive is key, right? From that first touch to the user experience, end to end, has to be I'll call it, you used Google experience, or I'll call it the Apple experience, right? Where you can, I literally watch my 2-year-old daughter poking around on the phone, and sometimes she teaches me things. So it's kind of amazing how simplistic.
And I think that the story behind amplification as opposed to automation, that's also like kind of, I think that works really well right now with, people losing jobs. So you're not displacing people, you're helping the people that are currently doing their jobs, making them better. Yeah. So maybe we kind of wrap up with maybe, maybe some positive changes, kind of a positive tone, what you've seen. You mentioned people are more open to have conversations, and I've seen like, major collaboration in the healthcare space. But from your perspective, what would you say, like, just kind of wrap up in a positive note, the current COVID-19 has helped you or kind of, assisted you in any way?
I think everyone, right? We're all human again. Couple personal anecdotes from that. Again, the nanny's been gone for the last 2 months as Virginia went on lockdown, and I've got 2 young kids, right? They're not in school yet. They can't care for themselves and entertain themselves. So oftentimes, more often than not, in the background, I've got children, and they're not always screaming, but sometimes they are. And just the amount of patience, right? It's not necessarily, oh God, shut that kid up, right? It's like, oh, that's cool, you've got a family. I think we relate to each other more. You're seeing more and more use of video chat, right? Where before you'd use the video conferencing, but you have the cameras off. And I think you hit something interesting. I don't know if you're going the same direction, but this collaboration, specifically amongst our industry, and the true kind of the human anger that comes with adversaries locking down hospitals in the middle of this pandemic, right? That's just an inhumane, unethical thing to do. So watching the collaboration and sometimes retaliation towards those kind of actor groups to say, F you guys, we're not going through this, right? We are human, you should be human too. Knowing that's not necessarily their mindset, right? They're driven from other motivations most of us will never understand, but I love that we're coming together as an industry, and it's amazing what we can do when we do come together. So I think that's probably the biggest and best outcome I've seen from this on the positive side.
Yeah, I think this is wonderful. I think you're absolutely correct. And it was unbelievable when I saw some of that, some of those attacks on the healthcare, including our health minister and so on.
That's
It's
really shameful. Yeah.
It is very so. It's a new level of low. I have to tell you. But anyway, this is super positive. There's some questions here, but I think what we're going to do is I'm going to send those out, afterward to Andrew, and then we'll share, your contact information, and if somebody wants to give the test drive or have a conversation with you about the technology, we'll more likely we'll definitely do that. But it's been a real pleasure hosting you. I love the positivity. I completely agree with the majority of what you mentioned about the startup world, and I love it. I think that's something that's not easy, not for everyone. But once you get the bug, you can't get rid of it. So again, thank you again. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to hosting you once the COVID-19 passes through, and to see you in person in New York City.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks so much again for the invite. It's been a really great conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.